true Indian history. And this is the way by which we think that we will serve Bharat Mata. The lecture series by eminent personalities would focus on Bharat, the present, past, and future. As you all know, by knowing the past, we can build the future. We are in that direction. The 3 days of the My Bharat campaign is running in a very wonderful way. The first day was speech by Sri Chakravarti Sulibile on 1857, the first war of Indian independence. Second day, it was the role of Indian revolutionaries and the saga by Sri Adarsh Gokhale.
Present, past, and future. As you all know,
today we all are excited to know more about Sri Swatantraveera Savarkar, his life and legacy, which would be told to us by Dr. Vikram Sampath. Right now, I request our founder secretary of Disha Bharat, Srimati Rekha Ramchandran, to introduce the guest of honor and Disha Bharat. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much to you, Sneha. A warm welcome to all of you and a special welcome to Dr. Vikram Sampath. I take this opportunity, namaste sir, namaste. I take this opportunity to introduce very briefly about Disha Bharat. Disha Bharat is in this journey of giving value education to the youth, especially the school and college students for the last 15 years. We have embarked on this very noble journey, and we want to create a great Bharat by making values an integral part of the education system. So what 3 highlights of this, our Disha Bharat is: know yourself, know your country, know your culture. So these 3 important aspects make a student more stronger. Inner strength, the student gets much more inner, he's becoming more stronger from inside. One important aspect. And second, importantly, we try to instill and kindle the patriotism in the students and the youth of this country, because our students need to understand their country and culture, because they'll have the great sense of belonging and pride. And when this sense of belongingness and pride comes to them, they automatically become social change agents and make Bharata the Vishwakuru. So this is what has been the Disha Bharat doing for the last 15 years, and we can proudly say that we have touched more than 3.5 lakh students so far. And this journey is on, and there's a great demand, and we are so happy to say that we have great students who are now becoming social change agents. So the main aim of Disha is transform youth to transform nation. That is very important to create a great Bharat. So this is what was a very, very brief introduction of Disha to all of you. And this My Bharat campaign for the next we have 13 more days left, including all of you to become a very dynamic part of this campaign and encourage Disha and the freedom movement at large. So having said that, now let me take the privilege of introducing the great speaker of today. Dr. Vikram Sampath is a Bangalore-based historian. He is the author of acclaimed books, Splendors of Mysore, Royal Mysore, The Untold Story of the Wadayars. And the second book that he has written is My Name is Gauhar Jan, The Life and Times of a Musician. And third is The Voice of Veena, S. Balachandar. That's a biography. And his latest book is the first volume of 2-volume biography, Savarkar Echoes from the Forgotten Past, from Penguin Random House, India, that has gone to become a national bestseller and acclaimed by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Dr. Vikram Sampath was awarded the Sahitya Academy first Yuva Puraskar in English literature and the ARSC International Award for Excellence in Historical Research in New York for his book Gauhar Jan. And Vikram was among the 4 writers and artists to be selected as a writer in residence at the Rashtrapati Bhavan in the year 2015. And Vikram has a doctorate in history and music from the University of Queensland, Australia, and is a senior research fellow at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, New Delhi. He is also an Aspen Global Leadership Fellow and an Eisenhower Fellow. An engineer, a mathematician from BITS, and MBA in finance from SP Jain, Mumbai. Vikram is also a trained Carnatic musician. Wow. He has also established the Archive of Indian Music, India's first digital archive for vintage recordings. He is also the founder and the director of Bangalore Literature Festival. Many of us must be aware of this also, definitely. He is the founder and director of Literature Festival, Indic Thought Festival, and Z Group's Earth, the cultural fest. So that is a multifaceted personality for us. My God, he's a mathematician, a musician, a historian, English literature. Oh my God, a writer, author, extremely accomplished person today we have in Dr. Vikram Sampath. And my dear audience, this is a great opportunity for all of us to listen to the life and legacy of Veer Savarkar. And when I say that, we should all be very, very thankful to Dr. Vikram Sampath for having written a book on Veer Savarkar's life and legacy. One of the greatest born patriot, one of the greatest patriots and the great person in the freedom movement. And Dr. Vikram Sampath has done a great service to India by writing his book and giving the rightful place for him in the Indian history. So thank you so much, sir. It's a great service from your end to the entire nation. So now over to Dr. Vikram Sampath. Thank you very much and a very warm welcome once again to all of you. Thank you so much. Jai Hind.
Namaskar, and thank you, Rekha ji, for this wonderful introduction and your very kind words. At the outset, I must say that a heartfelt word of appreciation and thanks to Disha Bharat for organizing this really dynamic and wonderful series of lectures that you have with such eminent speakers through these 15 days. And I think the kind of topics and also the range of speakers that you have from across the country, it's really a great opportunity for young India to also hear some of the best minds in this country. I'm not including myself in that necessarily, but then all the others also, I mean, on a very, very eclectic and wide-ranging set of topics that are there. And August, it's the month of Shravan, Bhadrapada, and we have so many festivals, including today, which is Raksha Bandhan and Yajurupa Karma and so many others that are going on. But alongside, August also signifies a festival for all of us nationalistic Indians, because this was the month of our freedom. And August has been on the horizon of nationalism and patriotism for so many decades, even before actually our freedom on 15th of August. So there's something about this month, and what better way to celebrate this month than invoking and remembering the names, the contributions, and the stories of all these eminent people who gave their lives so that you and I today can live, breathe, eat, in free India. Today's topic, and I'm very glad that a separate session has been included on Swatantra Veer Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, on whom there have been so many stories, largely those maligning him for several decades. And the time, as Rekha ji mentioned, the time has come where we place him and give him his rightful due for all the sacrifices that he, as well as his entire family, the Savarkar family, the kind of sacrifices they bore for our freedom struggle. And of course, Savarkar's life, the famous speech that Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji, had given, Savarkar mane tej, Savarkar mane tap. I mean, the whole, adjectives that Vajpayee ji had given about him. So there are, he is actually the multifaceted personality, which Rekha ji had mentioned. So the multifacets of his personality of a firebrand revolutionary, a born patriot, a die-hard nationalist, a political ideologue, a very sensitive poet, a playwright, and a fiery orator, a historian, if I could call him that as well. So how does one compress all of that, about a man who has so many dimensions to his life into a 40-45 minute capsule? So I think it's today we are going to limit only, and even that will only be a part of it in the time constraint, of Savarkar as a revolutionary. And we will not be getting into Savarkar as the Hindutva ideologue or the social reforms that he did, etc. We'll just confine our discussion today to Savarkar as a revolutionary. And it is very, it might actually, surprise people that almost always when we think of the word revolution and revolutionaries, we trace it back to Marxist lineage. Because almost all the great revolutions in the world, from the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917, were all led by Marxist forces. But then here was a model of revolution in India, which was inspired not at all by Karl Marx and the Marxist ideology, but by two aspects. One was, of course, the indigenous revolutions that were happening, both military revolutions as well as spiritual revolutions that were going on through the kinds that Swami Vivekananda and others were bringing about by the end of the 19th century. And the 1857, the Great Uprising, about which you already heard 2 days back, as I'm told. But alongside, Savarkar's model of revolution drew inspiration from the Italian revolutionaries, Mazzini and Garibaldi, who in the 1840s, the kind of the work that they did in Italy to unify the warring states there and come out of the thraldom of colonial rule by infiltrating the army and creating these different modules called Young Italy in different parts of Italy to bring young people. And it's good we're talking about that to young people today itself. So it was this model that Savarkar and his associates followed, and I'll elaborate that as we go along. So Savarkar was born in this little village called Bhagur in Nashik, in Maharashtra on 28th of May 1883 in a Chitpavan Brahmin family to Damodar Das Savarkar and Radhabai. He had two brothers, an elder brother Baba Rao or Ganesh Damodar and a younger brother Narayan Rao and a sister Maina. Now, right from childhood, the family was deeply, the father particularly used to read out scriptures, both in Sanskrit, Marathi, as well as books from other parts of the world to inspire these children on what was happening in the rest of the world. And Savarkar thus became a very precocious, reader right from his childhood. He would read a lot. Poetry germinated in him when he was barely 8 or 9 years old. And by the time he was 10, 12, he had read political philosophies, biographies, histories of most of the people from different parts of the world. So the reading bug was so much within him. Now, he lost his mother very early in life. And a few years later, there was this, it's quite eerie that what we are facing today with the pandemic, COVID-19, something similar happened in India in the 1890s, with 1896-97, with plague, plaguing different parts of India, particularly Maharashtra. And again, coincidentally, whatever the law that is now imposed in the country, the Epidemic and Diseases Act, it was actually enacted in 1897. Now that gave the British government unbridled power over the masses. Now, unlike today, where the governments of the day want to ensure that the COVID warriors, the nurses and doctors are there at the forefront to help patients out, the British government actually deployed soldiers and not medical practitioners because they didn't know how to deal with this epidemic. They just wanted to control the epidemic at all costs because it was affecting their commercial interests. Goods from India could not go out to other countries for sale because people were scared that this could lead to spread of the disease. So they wanted their commercial interests to be saved, and that's why these soldiers were let loose. And soldiers, they didn't know how to deal with something like this, and so they would barge into people's houses. Puja ghars used to be molested, women used to be molested. All of this was being done, and people, the stigma that was there, this whole idea of being infected by plague, it also impacted people a lot. So in the midst of all of this, there was a lot of, dissent in different parts of Maharashtra. Even Bal Gangadhar Tilak, incidentally, whose death centenary we commemorated 2 days ago on 1st of August. He had also written in the Kesari that who is that man who's going to stand up to save the life, the honors of their countrymen, their mothers and sisters. And the challenge was actually accepted by these young brothers known as the Chapekar brothers, Damodar Hari, Balkrishna Hari, and Vasudev Hari. Two of them who went and assassinated the plague commissioner in Pune, Charles Ayerst and Walter Rand. And this led to a huge furor in different parts of Maharashtra, because the Chapekars were arrested and they were executed, and this became almost part of folklore, because they went to the the execution with a smile on their lips and verses of Gita, the Bhagavad Gita in their mouth. And so that created so much of fervor in different parts of Maharashtra. And young Savarkar was just about 12, 13 years old then. He was deeply, deeply moved by the tale of the Chapekars. And the family deity was this wonderful idol, which is still there in Bhagur, of the Ashtabhuja Bhavani, the 8-handed goddess Bhavani. And in front of her, and since he had lost his mother, he used to consider this Bhavani as his mother, and a lot of conversations would happen with the being that the idol represented. And he made a vow in front of her, Bhishma Pratigya, so to say, that Shastrus Marta Marta Mare to Zunzen, in Marathi, which meant, I am going to keep fighting and killing my enemy till my last breath, not dying myself, but actually killing my enemy. I think very similar to what our Prime Minister recently said, Marte Marte Mare hai, for the valor of our soldiers at the border. So he took this vow, and little did anyone know, or he also knew, that this is going to turn out to be so prophetic, not only for himself, but also for his family, and also for the history of India itself was going to change on that one particular night. So this was not just a vow that was taken and forgotten, but then it led to the establishment of India's first ever secret society, organized secret society of young people, which was initially called the Rashtra Bhakta Samuha, as the name itself signifies, a patriots club. And that became Mitra Mela, which was actually a group of friends who, on the outside, they were just gathering for, the Ganesh Chaturthi pujas, which Lokmanya Tilak had started in Maharashtra, and also Shivaji Jayanti and all of that. But in these festivities, they would actually identify who were these people, the young people who were actually driven by the nationalistic spirit, and they would be brought into the inner core and led on the path of revolution. Now, what exactly? And then this later transformed into Abhinav Bharat, again, young India, so to say. Again, as I said, modeled on the young Italy concept that Mazzini had begun in Italy. So what was their philosophy and idea? So they all drew inspiration from the 1857 model, which was that the Indian army, British Indian army, consisted largely of Indian soldiers. Now, if the patriotic fervor and spirit of the Indian soldiers was kindled, and they could be forced to rise in rebellion against the colonial masters, then they felt that the British Empire would fall in no time. And this is exactly what inspired the 1857 patriots, who all the time, the idea was infiltrate the army and create a mass uprising in different parts of India. So Abhinav Bharat did exactly this, where inspiring these young people with stories of bravery and revolution from different parts of the country, and also give training in arms, because that was slowly, as the British government, the Rowlatt Act and others, which came much later, it was banning the whole use of arms and ammunition for India. So how best can you smuggle arms into India and train people in order to ensure that they get up in uprising? And simultaneously, if this happens in different parts of India, then the British Empire could not survive. So there were collaborations that were made with revolutionaries in Bengal, particularly, and later Punjab. So Bengal, you had the Anushilan Samiti and all these different revolutionary groups, which had people like Aurobindo Ghosh, Barendranath Ghosh, his brother, Khudiram Bose, several others, Prafulla Kumar Chaki. All these people were actually communicating across the country. So contrary to what our history books, constantly keep telling us, that revolution and revolutionaries, these were just, flash in the pan incidents, hot-blooded young men who threw bombs here and there, who killed a few people. It was not just that. And then they got executed. So their stories, their achievements, and their bravery is just reduced to a paragraph or a footnote in our history books. But this was not an unplanned and an non-strategic kind of a movement, but something that had so much of coordination. And the movement in Maharashtra was led in these decades, I'm talking of the late 1890s, early 1900s, by Veer Savarkar. And within no time, from Nashik, where the Abhinav Bharat began, the branches began to spring up all over Maharashtra. More than 500 to 800 students started getting enrolled in the Abhinav Bharat. And Baba Rao took over the reins of Abhinav Bharat when Vinayak Damodar Savarkar moves away to Pune, to the Ferguson College, to do his bachelor's degree. Now there too, he doesn't remain silent. He starts chapters of the Abhinav Bharat in different education institutions in Pune. And in 1905, when you have the partition of Bengal that Lord Curzon brings about, to protest against this, it was Savarkar who organized India's first ever student bonfire of foreign goods. Now, usually when we talk about Swadeshi movement and the bonfire of goods, the idea that comes up is that of Mahatma Gandhi, who did it. But this was in 1905 that Savarkar actually came up with this idea. And for that, he was the one who gave this idea to Tilak, who was his political guru. And it was Tilak, there was S.M. Paranjpe of the Kaal newspaper in Maharashtra, very firebrand revolutionary newspaper, who organized these bonfires in Pune, for which Savarkar paid the price for being rusticated from college, and he was put a very heavy fine as well. Now, despite all this, he does very well in his studies, and later when he graduates, there is this advertisement of a scholarship that was being given by this wonderful philanthropist, a revolutionary, a nationalist called Shyamji Krishna Varma. Now, you'd remember that Shyamji Krishna Varma's ashes were actually brought to India by our Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji when he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat. So he was a Gujarati, born in Gujarat, but then later becomes a very, very accomplished man. He's an Oxford scholar in Sanskrit, and then comes back to India, serves as the Diwan of several royal families and states there, but is very disillusioned and goes away to London for good. He leaves India. But his idea there was, sitting in London, how do I give scholarships to young Indians who are patriotic, bring them here, let them study, of course, but also ensure that they carry out the whole idea of revolution to liberate India, sitting in Europe. And why Europe? You may ask that why Europe for liberating India? Because the laws, the sedition laws were so strong in India that even anything that you wrote against the government, you could be put behind bars forever. Even Tilak had to face that when he wrote articles in support of the Chapekar brothers. Sedition laws were slapped on him. He was sent away to Mandalay in Burma for several years. And so this, to circumvent this, most of these revolutionaries operated out of London, Paris, and other parts of Europe. So it was almost an intercontinental kind of a campaign that they ran to seek not just simple concessions, which the Congress party at that time, which was dominated largely by what we call the moderate faction, the Naram Dal and the Garam Dal, that you have moderates and extremists. The moderates were just seeking for small concessions. Give us a few extra seats in the judiciary, some seats in the legislature. But this revolutionary group was actually seeking for complete and total independence, right in 1905, mind you. When actually even the Congress adopted the Purna Swaraj resolution for complete independence only in 1930. So 25 years before that, Savarkar and the others actually gave this clarion call for complete independence, and most of these activities happened from London. So Shyamji Krishna Varma had set up this India House, and which is still there. I mean, it's a house which has been taken over by other. It's British citizens now live there, but there's a blue plaque which says Indian patriot, philosopher Veer Savarkar, lived here. Like how British Municipal Corporation commemorates his presence, even if we Indians do or do not. So this India House, Savarkar became the de facto youth leader of the India House. And the India House, again, was a fascinating place with an array of characters whom sadly we in our history books hardly and seldom read about. These were all, young people, like many people who are listening to this talk, young people, many of them in their 20s, coming from middle-class houses, many of them, borrowing money, mortgaging their property, going all the way to London and different parts of England to study And somehow this whole bug bites them of fighting for their motherland, and they give up everything, including their lives, many of them, to fight for its liberation. So a few names, Lala Hardayal from Punjab, and it was almost like a microcosm of India. People from different parts of India coming there to India House. So it was a mini India, so to say. Savarkar from Maharashtra. There was Senapati Bapat, Pandurang Mahadev Bapat, again from Maharashtra. From Delhi, you had Lala Hardayal, who was again a great scholar who's from St. Stephen's. He had graduated. He again becomes an Oxford scholar, but then gives up his scholarship and everything to leave studies and become a revolutionary. He forms the Gadar Party, which organizes a cross-continental revolutionary movement for Indian liberation in Europe, which ties actually, Europe, North America, Canada, and Southeast Asia, particularly in the First World War times. So imagine at a time when technology was not so easy, where through Zoom calls or through WhatsApp you could communicate with people, these revolutionaries were actually building that international caucus of fellow thinkers, similar thinking individuals, to liberate India completely. So there was Lala Hardayal, there was Bhai Parmanand, again from Punjab. I can't get into the details of each of them. I've written about them in my book, but then each life is a fascinating life. Virendranath Chattopadhyay, who was called Chatto, a very fun-loving, jovial man. He was actually the brother of Sarojini Naidu. But then Sarojini Naidu went into the Congress, but this man was a die-hard revolutionary who spent a lot of time in Europe and later in Germany after London became a difficult place to carry on revolution from. So there was also MPT Acharya, who came, Mysore Brahmin, who came from South India. There was VVS Iyer, again from Tamil Nadu. So different parts of India, JC Mukherjee, Sikandar Hayat Khan, there were lots of these people who all operated there. And as I said, Savarkar was the kingpin, so to say, of this. So what was the thing that Savarkar did while he was there? There were a number of activities that he did to ensure that the revolutionary movement gets a fillip while he was in London. The first aspect was to give an intellectual structure, a corpus to the revolutionary movement. Now, as I earlier said, the thought that revolution is just a mindless activity of young people, he wanted to dispel that. So the first thing he does, within 6 months of reaching London, he writes the Marathi translation of his icon, Joseph Mazzini. And this book is then brought to India and distributed among revolutionaries. And 2 years he spends, in the British archives in London, researching about the 1857, uprising, which till then was always called the Sepoy Mutiny. The way the British tried to disparage that this was just a small incident. Some sepoys got excited because there was beef lard and pork lard and all that, and this was just a mutiny, danga, bagawat. It was nothing more than that. That's how they had tried to dismiss it off. But thanks to Savarkar, and I think that is exactly what the Home Minister Amit Shah ji had also mentioned, that but for Savarkar, the 1857 what was called revolt would have just been that and forgotten in our history books. So he actually spent 2 long years researching original documents, using the documents of the British right against them, and writing the history of India from an Indian perspective. And I think that has a lot of guidance and direction of how we need to do our history writing as well today. So he writes this book and also coins this phrase called the First War of Indian Independence. It was the first war, he said, of Indian independence, and not just a random, uprising by a few disgruntled soldiers. And this book, there were spies in different parts of, India House. They were all spies who were planted inside, outside, and copies of the manuscript were already stolen, and the British government had got to know about it, that there was such an explosive book that was being written. So none less than the Viceroy of India then, Lord Minto, he writes that this book by Savarkar should not reach India at any cost. So the Sea Customs Act was put on the book, and it becomes, again, there's so many firsts to Savarkar's credit. The first organized secret society, the first student bonfire that he did. And his book also becomes the first and probably the only book in the history of world literature which got banned even before it was published. So the British put this Sea Customs Act saying this manuscript should not come to India at any cost because it can cause a lot of disturbance in different parts of India. And but despite that, these revolutionaries had their own wonderful way of going about. So what they would do is they would have these double barrel, boxes. There would be a false bottom, and on the top there would be something else. And on the top they would fix some presents, Christmas gifts, and all of that. And down there would be all these explosive material, whether it was manuscripts, there was also bombs, there were pistols. All of these used to be smuggled and sent back to India. Now imagine, circumventing customs officials, going across different countries and continents. So this manuscript makes its way from London to Maharashtra. Baba Rao, his elder brother, gets it. He takes it to a printing press in Sholapur. Now there the British are keeping a track. So police raid the printing press. So he quickly takes away the manuscript and it is smuggled back to London. And from there, the manuscript goes to Paris. And there also the French police are set against this manuscript. So it is again withdrawn. It is sent to Germany to get published. And there, because Germany, they did a lot of Indological studies. The book was in Marathi. So they thought the Devanagari script would be something that the Germans would know, but then they made a complete mess of the typesetting. And so that is one reason it was withdrawn from there also, then sent to Belgium. And that was where the book was finally published. And VVS Iyer gets it translated into English. And then copies of this book were then, sent back to India. Now, towards the end of the talk, I'll explain as to how this book served as an inspiration for revolutionaries several decades after it was published. Now, along with providing this intellectual corpus, what Savarkar, spearheaded while in London was also to ensure these arms and ammunition came to different parts of India, and also bomb manuals, how to manufacture bombs. And that was a regular feature in India House. In the backyard, they would all, keep manufacturing bombs. So Savarkar sent his assistant, Senapati Bapat, along with Hemchandra Das Kanungo, who was a Bengali from the Anushilan Samiti. So once again, you see the Bengali revolutionaries and the Maharashtrian revolutionaries, they were actually working in tandem. So both of them go to get a copy of this bomb manual. They find a copy with some Russian tailor actually somewhere in Paris, and then they try to get it translated. It's all in Russian. They don't understand. Now, Senapati Bapat has a German girlfriend who was in Berlin and doing her MBBS. And she knew Russian. And so she said she will translate this whole bomb manual into English. And that's how copies of this bomb manual were cyclostyled and then sent back again, smuggled back to India. And copies were sent to Tilak. Some copies went to Baba Rao. And the same copies were also sent to Bengal, which became the source material for the Alipur bomb case in Bengal, led by Khudiram Bose and Prafulla Chaki and Aurobindo Ghosh and others. So the same bomb manual that came in from London. Now, alongside, Hemchandra, inspired by Savarkar, designed the first flag of independent India, the first flag of complete Purna Swaraj, India. And in 1908, this flag is actually unfurled at the International Socialist Conference in Stuttgart in Germany by Madam Bhikaji Kama, again a very, very illustrious freedom fighter who came from Bombay, a Parsi lady who gave up her married family life and dedicates herself to the cause of Indian freedom. So she takes up the challenge of going to this conference, and despite British, trying to prevent her from speaking there, Madam Bhikaji Kama and Sardar Singh Rana, another famous freedom fighter, they unfurl this flag, and Bhikaji Kama, announces there that you can do what you want to the British imperialists. India is going to be free from today. So this was the fervor that they kind of generated there. Now, alongside, as I said, these explosives, these bombs that were being sent, to different parts of India were used for political assassinations of people whom the revolutionaries considered as being detrimental to the cause of Indian freedom. So the Alipur case happens in Maharashtra, the Nashik murder case, where this young boy, Anant Lakshman Kanhere, gets this Browning pistol that Savarkar sent from London, and he kills A.M.T. Jackson, who's the district collector in Nashik. And that once all these bombings and killings happen in India, the British are totally alarmed that something really sinister is happening. And nationwide, there is, investigation that is set up. And then they start tracing the dots and say, first Baba Rao is arrested, he's unfairly tried, and he's sent away to 25 years of imprisonment, what was called as life transportation to Kalapani in the cellular jail in Andamans. And they start tracing backward, and the root of this whole, the brain behind all these problems, they figure out it is Veer Savarkar. And so at any cost, the copious amount of correspondence that is exchanged between the Indian government and the British government, which I've included in my book as well, it shows that at any cost, the British wanted this man back to India. He was categorized as a D category or a dangerous category criminal. And it's very interesting that, especially for a writer like me, to think that here was a man who actually never wielded a weapon himself. He never took the gun and killed anyone, but the pen being mightier than the sword, the British were scared more of what Savarkar wrote and how that would inspire people much more than what he did. So the power of the written word and how it can actually make powerful regimes and empires collapse. I think that is a living proof of that. So the British put all these false cases against him, the Fugitive and Offenders Act. Now, he was not a fugitive. He was a bona fide student who had gone there on a scholarship. So, but this act is put on him, and he is tried in London. He tries his best with all the other revolutionaries to win that case, because he knew that if the cases are kept in London, the laws were much more lenient there compared to India. So he would win the case. But then the British knew that loophole, and that's why they wanted him back to India at any cost. So he loses the case in London. He's put on a ship, and that ship then extradites him back to India. Now, even there, when the ship docks for a brief while at Marseille, a port in France, Savarkar opens the porthole of the lavatory and jumps into the sea and swims to French soil. Now, this incident itself, and then what happens is the British soldiers, they see him going away from the porthole, they come running behind him. Savarkar goes and catches a French policeman and says, "Take me to the nearest magistrate." But he cannot speak French. The policeman cannot understand English. So in this comedy of errors, you had the British soldiers come, catch him, and take him back to the ship. But this incident itself created a case in the International Court of Justice at Hague, very similar to what is happening now between India and Pakistan in the Kulbhushan Jadhav case. And Savarkar was studying law there, so he knew the nuances of the law. So what his case that he was fighting was, I was convicted as a subject of the British Empire. But then once I stepped onto French soil, the British have lost their authority over me. And so now it is up to the French government to see whether they want to give me asylum or they want to hand me over to the British. So the British have lost their power over me. And so it's now the onus is on the French. So the entire onus was put on the French, and the French newspapers were agog with discussions that this is an assault on French sovereignty. The British doing what they're doing, they're capturing someone from our soil and taking him back. So this whole thing creates this case. But even there, the very fact that the British wanted him back ensured that they put as much pressure on France, ensure that France loses this case at Hague, and Savarkar is extradited back to India. And there he's tried for the Nasik murder and conspiracy case by this flimsy thing that they put, that those pistols came from him, which Anant Kanhere used to kill Jackson, and that's why he should be convicted. Now, he was not given a jury, a lawyer. There was no right to appeal. So the outcome was already a fixed match. So he was meted out what was perhaps the harshest punishment, living punishment other than execution, to any freedom fighter, which was 2 transportations of life, which was 25 plus 25, 50 long years. Now, here was a young man who was 27, 28. If he survived this 50 long years, he would come back in 1960. 1910 was when he was convicted. And on his neck also, there was always a little thing that they had put saying 1960. So every day you are looking at it saying 50 more years I need to spend in jail to break his spirit. That's what the British had tried. So in fact, it is said that in the court, when the judge, pronounces the judgment, while all the people in the courtroom were so sad to hear that he was going to be out for 50 years, Savarkar actually says, thank you, my lord, for finally, you have accepted the Hindu philosophy of reincarnation. I can get two transportations for life only if there is another life. So you have finally come around to understanding the Hindu way of life, which shows so much about the equanimity that he must have had even in such trying circumstances. So Savarkar is then packed off to Kalapani, and where he spends more than a decade, almost 12 years there in incarceration, and some of the worst kind of inhuman tortures that he faces. And it is hence very appropriate that the Prime Minister too went there and paid his homage and obeisances in his cell. It was a small little cell which was not even enough to move around within that cell, and he was put in solitary confinement. Today with this lockdown and isolation, with all the comforts that we have in our homes, and we have internet, we have everything, still we are facing the brunt of being isolated. Whereas here you had solitary confinement for 6-7 months in a row, where there's no human interaction at all that he had. The only interaction was his cell used to overlook the gallows. So every morning you would see people being led, screaming and shouting to their death, and chained fetters, standing position for several weeks. You had to ease yourself, call of nature also in the same kind of position. And basic, human facilities of good food, toilet facilities, medical facilities were not given to our freedom fighters. Now while very belatedly the British have come and apologized for Jallianwala Bagh, I think it is very much appropriate that they must do a special apology only for the human rights violations that were committed at cellular jail. It was unbelievably horrific. And, even while I was writing about that in my book, I had to emotionally choke so many times. There were so many others, almost 100 political prisoners. And sadly, we don't even know their names today. We don't even remember them or commemorate or thank them, for giving up. These were all young men in their late teens, 20s, who had families, and they gave up all of that to suffer this kind of atrocities in jail at Kalapani, where all these basic facilities were not given. Now, most of the food that was provided to them was, the spoiled food, which had pieces of reptiles and snakes and all of that. So eating that, most of them would end up with diarrhea. Now, even to go to the toilet, there were fixed timings in the day. Imagine. And if you had diarrhea and if you had to go to the toilet several times, that was not allowed. So most of them would defecate in their cells. So sitting, eating, sleeping amidst your own squalor, you can imagine what that could do. And all day they would be put on this punishment of going on this oil grinding machine, or kolhu as it was called, where they had to go round and round the oil grinding machine to extract about 30 pounds of oil every day. And if they were not done, they would be flogged and punishments would be given. So even if they fell sick, no medical facilities would be given. So many people would actually either commit suicide. There was Indu Bhushan Roy, a young man who committed suicide. Several others went mad. They lost their sanity. Ulaskar Dutt being one of them. And they've written memoirs, so you can read what exactly they actually faced in their lives. But it was Savarkar who kept he says in his memoirs, Maji Janma Tape, called My Transportation for Life, where he says, I also went weak. I'm also a human being, but many times the thought crossed that I should end my life because death was better than this living hell. But then he was reading the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. He was doing meditation. He was also inspired by poetry, all of which kept his life force, alive. And he not only kept himself motivated, but he motivated all the other prisoners also, who used to call him Bada Babu. He became their spokesperson, and which is exactly what he used to do through all those much maligned petitions, about which I'm not going to talk about, because he was being a spokesperson for all these other prisoners and asking for the release of all the other political prisoners along with himself. So, and very soon there were jail reforms that were brought about, where there was a library that was set up, books were circulated among the prisoners, good food they could start cooking their own food. So all these reforms that Savarkar and his elder brother actually spearheaded along with the other revolutionaries brought about those changes in the Kalapani jail. So after 12 long years, there were several people who were getting remission or coming out of jail. And it was much later that Savarkar also in 1924, he gets finally released. By then he's already spent 14 years in jail, but then he's given a conditional release, which says that you are not going to, participate in politics, and you're going to be confined only to the Ratnagiri district in Maharashtra, and you to go out of Ratnagiri, you have to take the British permission, and constant surveillance was kept on him. So all these constant talk that he sold out to the British, he became their stooge. Now, if the British, he had actually sold out, there was no need for the British to keep such a close track of him. And even that restrictions were put on him initially for just 5 years, but that extends to 13 long years. So if you are a sold out agent, then you would release them, and why would you keep them under surveillance? So right till the end, the British actually never ever trusted Savarkar because of the background of what all he did while in London. So because, and in these, once he comes out of jail, 1924 is the year. The next 13 years, as I said, till 1937, he's kept in confinement in Ratnagiri, and that is where he, to ensure that the British do not know what he is doing, he also embarks on the social reforms, which was, of course, not just to do that, but it was a matter of conviction for him, having by then penned that wonderful treatise called Essentials of Hindutva, what it means to be a Hindu. He was putting that into practice by trying to unify Hindu society, bring about caste reforms, intercaste dining, intercaste marriage, a temple, Patit Pavan Mandir, where people of all communities could enter, and so on in Ratnagiri. For something that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and he, had a lot of thoughts on caste eradication, which were very, very common. So, but even though one might feel that in 1924, the revolutionary in Savarkar had died and he had taken to other means, but then the revolutionary spirit was there somewhere, and that continued through tacit support and also inspiration to the revolutionaries. Now, that book that I mentioned, The First War of Independence, that the second edition of that was published by none other than Bhagat Singh. And Bhagat Singh used to make this as an entry criteria for those who are entering into the HSRA, the Hindustan Socialist Republican Association, saying if you have read the 1857 book of Savarkar and the Life of Barrister Savarkar by Chitragupta, only then you are going to be enlisted into the HSRA. So it was such an inspirational book. And 20 years later, even the Indian National Army, Rash Bihari Bose and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, they got copies of this book translated in several languages, including right from Tamil to Japanese, and copies of that were found there. So for so long, this book served as an intellectual Bible, so to say, for the revolutionary movement in India. So to that extent, he was actually inspiring the revolutionaries. And Rash Bihari Bose, who was sitting in Japan, there was regular communication between him and Savarkar after Savarkar is released in 1937 and becomes the president of the All India Hindu Mahasabha, and becomes a very, very strong and potent voice of the Hindu community, particularly in those testing years leading to freedom, preceded by Muslim separatism and partition, the eventual sad partition of India. So even then, Rash Bihari Bose was in touch, and in 1940, in the month of June, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose actually goes and meets Savarkar, and 1939, he meets Savarkar, and it's mentioned in Savarkar's memoirs and in that of his secretary, and in a letter that he later writes to Rash Bihari Bose, that it was Savarkar who inspired Subhash Babu to leave India, go away, and join hands with the enemies are friends. So by then the World War had erupted, Second World War. So join hands with those countries, whether it was Germany, Italy, or Japan, who are fighting against the British, and use that to create another armed revolt in the army. And that's what happened in 1946 with the naval mutiny in Bombay. Again, if you see this uninterrupted flow right from 1857, the First War of Independence, to the naval mutiny of 1946 in Bombay, inspired by Netaji and the INA, it was finally that which brought India her freedom. So the whole concept that these early revolutionaries, the Abhinav Bharat and Savarkar, had modeled of how creating an internal revolt with the army would ensure that the edifice of the British Empire would come collapsing down, was fructified through that. So there are numerous aspects, as I said, of Savarkar's life. And I would once again invoke that wonderful speech of Vajpayee ji, where it is very difficult to encapsulate someone who is as multidimensional, multifaceted as Veer Savarkar. And it is unfortunate that today his name gets invoked for all the wrong reasons. Somebody who was an inspirational figure for so many people. Even Chandrasekhar Azad and Baba Rao used to work in tandem. One day before Chandrasekhar Azad actually kills himself in Allahabad, the two of them meet for hours in Banaras, and that's documented in both their memoirs. There's lots of such interesting things, how underground operations all these revolutionaries were carrying on, and how in the midst of all this, Savarkar was providing that intellectual direction, the strategy to revolutionaries. So while, as I said, there are several dimensions of his life, very illustrious, stormy life, today's discussion, a brief discussion, I hope I have been able to give a brief insight into the revolutionary aspect of him. And what was equally interesting for me to find was a sensitive poet, someone who was also willing to go and kill a person, was also such a sensitive poet. In London, when he's made to leave the India House, he goes to the seaside in Brighton, a small seaside town in England, along with his friend Niranjan Pal, the son of Bipin Chandra Pal. And there, while seeing the ocean, he's so overwhelmed with emotions, and he bursts out in tears and composes this poem and also sings it, as Niranjan Pal writes, Ne majasi ne parat matra bhumila sagara pran tadamalala. My soul is in turmoil, and he scolds that ocean and says, you cheated me. You promised that you will take me to England, give me education, and help me fight for the freedom of my country. But you have fooled me. Today I'm sitting here in pleasure. What use is my education? What use is all this pleasure if my mother back home is chained, is weeping in tears? So take me back to my motherland. So the sensitivity of a poet who could burst into those kind of verses impromptu, and the song, incidentally, later immortalized by the Mangeshkars, Lataji and Hridayanath ji and other Asha ji, all of them have sung this. It's on YouTube. You could check it out. It's a beautiful, soul-stirring poem, Sagara Prana Tadamalala, that shows the many, many dimensions of this wonderful personality. I certainly know that I haven't been able to do justice to the life, the time, the revolutionary aspect itself of such a wonderful human being in this limited time. But I hope this gives you all a flavor of the stormy life and the immense contribution that this man gave to our freedom struggle, and also the sense as to how unfair it is to then call all these expletives and names to him so many decades after freedom. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. It was really heartwarming to listen to you. My eyes were filled with tears when I got to know that my life today is because of the struggle and dedication of such great people. Thank you so much. Of course, the audience have a lot of questions, because this is a time when if audience ask questions, which means they were interested and they were getting to know a lot of things. So may I seek your permission to ask their question?
Sure,
Yes.
sure.
Sir, what do you think, in your opinion, in the given space and the presence of Savarkar Indian history books for Indian textbooks to study and understand Veer Savarkar, is it sufficient, or is there a clear negligence on Savarkar's legacy and contributions?
No, that is very, very obvious. I mean, as a student, myself, I studied in CBSE schools, and I don't remember even a mention of Savarkar. Forget Savarkar. I mean, all those other people I mentioned, right? I mean, Madan Lal Dhingra, Virendra Chattopadhyay, Bhikaji Kama did make a mention, but all the others, and there was not even a mention in my history book of the cellular jail or the people who were there. It was always a very, very simplistic, linear, monochromatic, non-violent struggle that was fed to us. Now, I'm not undermining the impact of the mass movement, the non-violent struggle, which kind of galvanized that sense of nationalism and oneness among Indians who never think of ourselves as one country. We all the time keep fighting with everyone amongst ourselves. So to that extent, Gandhiji and the Congress brought people together. But that doesn't mean that that was the only reason why we won independence eventually. Simultaneously, there was an unbroken chain of Sashastra Kranti or armed struggle. And as I mentioned, the final nail in the British coffin was not, unfortunately, Quit India movement, as we are made to believe, but it was the naval mutiny. And so not only Savarkar's legacy, but I think the legacy of an alternative narrative to Indian freedom struggle has been willfully and very maliciously kept away from our historiography, our historical narrative, and our history textbooks. And now 3 generations, 2 to 3 generations have passed, which have been indoctrinated by this government version of what the history of Indian freedom struggle has been. And so in that context, I think initiatives like what Disha Bharat is doing to bring out these alternative narratives to freedom struggle become extremely important, especially to popularize that among the youth of this country, so that there is that sense of curiosity saying, can we know a little more about this aspect? And then they themselves, dig deeper into that, or put that pressure on the schools, on the teachers, on all of them to ensure that we also want to hear those stories. And I've been time and time again saying that I think Cellular Jail and Jallianwala Bagh and all these places should become places of pilgrimage for our children, students of history, who should be taken to these places and live, shown in what conditions our forefathers actually stayed and suffered there, so that you and I are able to sit here so happily and breathe fresh air. That would bring about that sense of, ownership, pride, and also patriotism among our young people.
That was wonderful. Absolutely. There is one more question from a seeker. I would rather call the person who has questioned as seeker, because they want to know more about the Swatantra Lakshmi. Savarkar's idea of Hindutva and cultural nationalism is debated in academic and intellectual circles since decades. How do you analyze these ideas of Savarkar in present-day context with secularism as a political tool in intellectual debates?
So, I don't mind answering it, but I think, as I mentioned right at the beginning, this discussion restricts itself to the revolutionary side of Savarkar. But since the seeker wants to know, I will very briefly, because, we can have an entire 2 hours only on Savarkar's Hindutva. So Savarkar's Hindutva was not about religion. And he says that, it's a theology. It was not linked to the theological aspects of Hinduism, but a sense of a cultural and, nationalistic identity that he was creating. Asindhu, Sindhu Paryanta, Yasya Bharata Bhumika, that he said, anybody who lives within the space of the, the Indus to the oceans, who considers this land, this sacred land, as his Punya Bhu, holy land, not in terms of religion, but in terms of their reverence and loyalty, and Pitrubhu, the land of their ancestors, is going to be a Hindu. And he can be of any other religion also, but he would be termed as a Hindu according to him. So while he was the president of the All India Hindu Mahasabha, the speeches that he gave in the presidential sessions are compiled in what is known as the Hindu Rashtra Darshan. So, which is the conception of what this Hindu Rashtra, which is made as this demon, which is going to, gobble up all the minorities and all that is made out to us today. He very clearly mentions there that in this Hindu Rashtra, nobody is going to be discriminated on the basis of religion, gender, caste, any kind of ethnicity. Everybody is going to be equal in front of the eyes of the law. So a majority community, which is the Hindus, will not get any extra privileges because they are the majority. And conversely, the minority will not get any extra concessions because they are a minority. Now, he said even the government could give, grants to madrasas and churches and all those things. That's fine. But then the amount of money you give to them should be proportionate to the amount of tax that they pay to the national exchequer. So a very, very utilitarian, non-emotional thinker. If you're going to help the country grow, the country will give it back to you. Otherwise, you are not just going to proliferate. You're not going to be getting grants from the national exchequer. Now, similarly, he also says there should not even be a ghost of suspicion in the minds of the minority communities that the Hindu Rashtra is going to gobble up their cultural, religious, linguistic rights. And the state will do everything to safeguard these. So you are free to follow whatever religion you want, but keep it to the confines of your house. Don't bring your religion into the public. Don't mix religion and politics. So I don't know if this is not secularism, what else is? So we all know secularism was not included in our constitution in the preamble when the constitution came about. But then the whole the concept of equality of people, irrespective of religion, draws itself from these ideas of the Hindu Rashtra that Savarkar propounded. So I think there's been a terrible misrepresentation and a misunderstanding which has been done only by malicious, agenda. And sadly, on the other side, there has been not much effort to ensure that these correct messages about what exactly this Hindutva was ever made to reach out to whether it's young people, to the media, to whatever, popular culture. So every time there is defensiveness, saying, no, this is not that, it's not a militant thing and all of that. So, but then once one reads the actual, text about this, one gets a better idea as to what was actually being conceived.
That was wonderful. I hope the seeker got his answer. One more question that has arisen is, many critics of Savarkar who opposed Savarkar's bravery question on so-called mercy petition to British government. What is the truth behind these allegations? I'm sure you have answered it, but I request you to please elaborate on that.
Okay, I thought I would be saved of that because I think they have answered it several times even online, but nonetheless, okay. So, so this whole concept of mercy petition, I don't call it a mercy petition, it's a petition. In Hindi, we would call it a yachika. So it was a very legitimate tool that was allowed to all the political prisoners, not separately given only to him. So everybody, just as you could keep a lawyer to defend your case, you could also file a petition to free yourself from the jail, which was given to all prisoners, and anybody who was jailed would, invoke this thing. Much later, you had even Ram Prasad Bismil, you had Ashfaqullah and others who, through people like Madan Mohan Malviya and others, actually filed petitions. So Savarkar was, as it is a lawyer, he knew what the law was. So in my book, in the appendix, I have actually included all the petitions. There were 6 or 7 that he filed. And if you read through that, it's never an apology, that I'm very sorry for what I did and all that. Of course, the language is like that. You can't write a mercy petition from a pedestal, a petition from a pedestal. You have to, your most, obedient servant. That was the way language and letters, the formal template of letters that used to be written. You need to see Gandhi's letters. It was in the similar type of language that was used. So he always in his petition says, clarify my position. Am I a common prisoner or am I a political prisoner? If I'm a common prisoner, I should get certain concessions. After 6 months, I should be given remission if I have good behavior. My family should be allowed to meet with me. Now, these people could not meet their family for almost 1.5 to 2 years. Write one letter in 1.5 years. His sister-in-law actually dies, and the brother and Savarkar don't even know that this woman who meant so much to them had died. So they were not given pen and paper to write, and he himself used to inscribe his poetry on the walls of the cell with his nails. So basic facilities are not given. So clarify what is it. If I'm a political prisoner, I need certain, the law of India, mainland India gives certain concessions, whereas in Port Blair, these are not followed. So clarify that. That was his common trend. Now, even the British, you had this man called Reginald Craddock, who comes in 1913, if my memory serves me right, to interview several of these political prisoners. And then he writes a formal report to the Home Ministry in Delhi, saying, I interviewed Savarkar, and nowhere does he show any remorse or apology for what he has done. He is very, very defiant about what he has done. So the British official record itself states that this man is not, apologetic about what he has done. Now, in the 1917 petition that he writes, and that people conveniently ignore, one of the lines that he says is that if my name constitutes an obstacle to the release of all the other prisoners, then omit my name and release the others, so that, and that would give me as much gratification as my own release would give. So it was clear, as I mentioned earlier, he was also acting as a spokesperson for all these other people, because most of them were so young, 18, 19, 20, they didn't even know English. And they all looked up to him because he was a London returned barrister. So you know the law, Bada Babu, you're the Bada Babu. So you write on our behalf and get us out. And most of them used to, the funny thing was the others used to get released, but the man who would actually file the petition for them, he would be kept behind. And about this too, Sachindranath Sanyal, you have Sanjeev Sanyalji, who's coming, I saw in the list of speakers, his granduncle, Sachindranath Sanyal, was a famous revolutionary of this country who also formed the HRA, which was a precursor to Bhagat Singh's HSRA. Sachindranath Sanyal writes in his autobiography called Mera Bandi Jeevan in Hindi, where he says, Savarkar advised me and several other prisoners to write a petition, very similar to what he had filed. But I was released and the others were released, whereas the two Savarkar brothers were not released. And the reason for that was that the British were so scared of them that if they were released and sent back, then the Bombay presidency, the revolutionary spirit that had fizzled out, it would again get rekindled. So they wanted them in jail at any cost. And the most funny part is in 1920, when Savarkar's younger brother Narayan Rao actually reaches out to Mahatma Gandhi and says, my brothers have suffered almost for 10 years now in jail. Can you please intervene with the British government and get them out? Then Gandhi himself advises Narayan Rao saying, ask your brothers to file a petition. He also files a petition on their behalf, saying they have suffered enough. Now they are coming to the constitutional process. So let them off. So if petitioning is such a bad word, then Mahatma Gandhi would not advocate for filing of a petition. So I think this whole idea to malign this man and make him out as this very weak and cowardly person, and this whole talk, he gave the title of Veer to himself. All this is utterly false, because I have mentioned also that it was after his release from Ratnagiri that in a public function in 1925 was when Vaman Rao Joshi, one of the literary figures in Maharashtra, he confers this title of Swatantra Veer, because his letters, and you mentioned that very nicely, I was so touched that you mentioned that his letters in Abhinav Bharat would always start with this thing, that Swatantra Lakshmi ki Jai. They would invoke that, and that famous song that he composed, Jayostute Shri Mahan Mangale Shivaspade Shubhade Swatantrate Bhagavati Twamaham Yasho Yutam Vande. So that thing, so the invocation of Swatantra Lakshmi, and so Swatantra Veer, who was a devotee of that Swatantra Lakshmi, that title was given to him in a public function. So to say that he wrote it himself, this Chitragupta book also, they say, oh, the Chitragupta was actually he only. There are numerous, doubts on that. There is one theory which says it was actually C. Rajagopalachari who wrote that under the pen name of Chitragupta, because that book was published in 1926 in Madras. So why would, if he had to get it written, he would have got it written in Bombay presidency itself, in Maharashtra. It may not have been published in Madras. So there are numerous aspects, and it is just a very malicious agenda which is sadly run today to defame him. And his opponents think by doing that, they are probably castigating the BJP and Narendra Modi and all that, but without realizing that in the process, I think they are doing great disservice to a great patriot.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vikram Sampath sir, for enlightening us about the great freedom fighter, Swatantra Veer Savarkar. This has made us more responsible to look at our responsibility towards our country. Thank you for spending your crucial time with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And my best wishes to Disha Bharat, not only for the rest of these wonderful series that you have conceptualized, but in your onward journey. I do hope that Disha Bharat comes on with several such inspiring events and programs that give our youth the true picture of Indian history and inspire them to be, not only proud of their country, but also be aware of their past. Because as you rightly said, and as George Orwell had said, he who controls the past controls the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. We are seeking your support.
Definitely, always there.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Dear viewers,